Greetings and salutations. What is up? I'm Caleb Scythomal, your favorite DP film scholar, coming at you with another video. Today, we're going to be reviewing Godzilla King of Monsters. First review for the channel. Big first, inaugural movie review. Stay tuned. It's going to be an interesting one. Alright, so first a little rundown of the movie. It was originally released in 1956, though this is a heavily edited American version of the 1954 Japanese film Godzilla, aptly named. So the original film was directed by Ishiro Honda, while this version of the movie was directed by Terry Morse, although a directing credit was also given to Ishiro Honda. So now, first and foremost, I'd like to preface this review by saying it is not a spoiler-free review. I'm sorry, there are going to be spoilers for a 62-year-old movie in this review. Apologies if that affects your viewing experience. But moving on, so I guess, and now my interpretation, I haven't seen the original Japanese version of this movie, only the American version. But from what I gather, there are 16 minutes of footage that were cut from the original and replaced with new footage shot exclusively for this North American release. And so it would appear to me that the entire storyline with the American journalist Steve Martin is what was added to this version of the film. And in the original film, I guess there were quite a bit of scenes almost knocking the Americans and everything they did with World War II and the whole Hiroshima situation. And a lot of that was cut, and they added Steve Martin to give a little American perspective. So now, looking at the plot, this movie follows Steve Martin, I'd say almost as the main character, who is an American journalist who goes to Japan to look at this problem that's being created after what seems to be a few storms initially, but then the locals are saying that it's Godzilla, this mythical beast, monster, I guess, from an island. And he doesn't believe it at first, and he's kind of just there to investigate. So his perspective, Steve Martin's perspective, is mostly told through flashbacks and voiceover narration. Voiceover narration, some of that non-diegetic sound, but though for the most part, while there are, I think, a few good examples, Road to Perdition comes to mind, of narration being used in smart ways, I think that for the most part, this is me injecting my personal opinion because this is a review, narration is usually lazy in films just because it's a lot of exposition, and films, as with all good storytelling, I think it comes down to showing, not telling, and exposition for the most part is usually telling. But that's that. I don't want to give a full description of the plot. If you want to know more about the plot, go watch the movie or read the Wikipedia page. I'm here to give my opinion of the movie, not to tell you what happens. This is a review. So now getting into it, my opinion of the movie, it's not a good movie. It's a bad movie. I think the movie does a lot wrong. It does way too much. It's all over the place, and I don't know if that's mainly because it was originally one film, and then it was highly re-edited, and lots of new scenes were shot for this American release, or what, but it just tries to do way too much. But that being said, I think my main problem of the movie, and where most of my problems originate, are in the editing of the movie. So now, hear me out here. This is Caleb Scythomal Film Theory. Film Theory 101, Caleb Scythomal. In a monster movie, I think that there's nothing more important to nail than the scale of your monster. A good monster movie establishes the scale of the monster. Without the scale of the monster, you don't know. It's monsters, specifically Godzilla, are all about their size. It's about establishing the scale of Godzilla and the other monsters in relation to what the world they're living in. And you also want to establish not just scale, but just establish the monster within your world. So now on a grander scale, show the destruction that they can cause show their different powers, show like how imminent of a threat they are. But then on a scene by scene scale, I think it's important to establish where your monster is in relation to your other characters, where they are in relation to other like buildings, just where they are in relation to other objects. I think that aspect of a monster movie is like the one thing you need to nail, because without that you get a film that gets a little stale. It doesn't really have that thriller aspect of a good monster movie. And specifically when I'm talking about establishing the monster's position with your main characters in individual scenes, when that's done poorly and you have an illegible film, you don't get that impending threat, and you don't really feel like your characters are ever in danger. And I feel like that is where this movie really, really messes up. Because that's literally the most important thing of a monster movie. And this movie just does an awful job of that. The editing is kind of all over the place. And a lot of that comes down to, I think, maybe the special effects, or maybe poor directing. Just, it's not very legible of a movie. I never truly knew where Godzilla was in relation to the other characters, or how imminent that threat was. And so like I was mentioning, I think a lot of that comes down to special effects, in that they recorded the Godzilla portions of the movie separate from the Steve Martin portions of the movie, in that you can't film like the actual city of Japan with your model city of Japan and your guy in a suit. And I think that somewhere in the translation between the model city scenes and the Steve Martin scenes, Steve Martin not as in like just the American scenes, but as in the real human scenes and not the like Godzilla scenes. I think somewhere in the translation between those, because you want to combine in a successful movie, in King Kong for example, you combine the stop motion and your full motion video to create a product that is fully legible and it's cohesive. And I think that somewhere in the translation for this movie, you lost the cohesive product. There was it didn't fully line up for me, and so that made for a movie that just left me confused. And I think that most of that comes down to editing, and I don't know if it was like poor editing on like the actual editors, or poor direction, like he or she didn't have a lot of footage to work with, and it was just kind of all over the place. But I thought that it was very like just poorly done. Specific call out to the toy car scene. That was really weird. I don't know, not a fan of it. It's obvious that it's just poorly done, and not in a charming way either. I think King Kong does a really good job of being a movie that knows what it is, and kind of it's a very charming movie, even though like it's not really like it's stop motion. I think that and I don't want this movie review to quickly evolve into a King Kong celebration. That's what it might turn into, because I love that movie. So beyond that, I think the film tried to do too much, and I think a lot of that comes from the introduction of Steve Martin's character. I don't know how cohesive the original product was, but I think by introducing his storyline, it was kind of all over the place. Where King Kong, it's very straightforward. It's about this director who wants to make a movie about this big creature. He goes to see the big creature, and the big creature steals his main female protagonist and begins wreaking havoc. And there's a bunch of cool fights with other monsters, and then eventually he comes to New York. Cool stuff. This one is kind of all over the place, where it's like, okay, it's a monster movie, but then you have an American journalist who's there trying to investigate it. Though he's there and kind of in contact with Godzilla. It's never like fully like, it's kind of all over the place. And then you have a weird love affair. And then you have like weird parallels to Hiroshima. Not weird, but just like parallels to Hiroshima, and metaphors that they're trying to make. It just seems very all over the place and scatterbrained. So now I'm not sure if that's a side effect of the Americanization, or if that's a criticism that would still remain relevant with the original version. But that's just my take on it. yeah, I just felt like this film didn't really know what it was trying to go for. I think that it might have been trying to be not too pretentious, but it was just maybe trying to be a little too like headstrong with the Hiroshima parallels. And I think that that's great, but if you're gonna do that, you can't get rid of like the very strong anti-American segments, and I think that discussion's like very important, and I think that that's something you can include in a modern movie, but I think that at the time they felt that they couldn't include that because of just political climate and the ability to discuss things politically in Hollywood. I think that now while political discussion in America, I don't want to get into that, I think that in Hollywood, there's more room for criticism of American politics. And so I think that maybe you might have had a better film with the Japanese version, but this American version doesn't really hold up. That being said, I think there's something to be said about the aesthetic of the film. Now, whether or not this is due directly to the film itself or because the film happens to be a 50s monster movie, I'm not sure. That being said, I think the aesthetic is really good. I think that a lot of that comes down to the score. The score is fantastic. It really nails the 50s monster movie aesthetic. And now, well, at the time, that's not what you're going for. Retroactively, as somebody watching it today, I think that like the score like works really well. And I think that in the scenes it's applied, it works really well. And I know Trevor talked about this in his video, and I'm no music expert, so I'm stealing this from Trevor. But the rhythmic like pounding of the music work very well with the rhythmic pounding of Godzilla's footsteps. I thought that the score is really good, and Tag even had in his review the scene of the diver going down to kill Godzilla, and I never really noticed it in the moment while I was watching it, but watching Tag's review, I was just surprised by how like poignant I guess the music was. Moving on, I thought the sound effects great. I'm not gonna get into how the Godzilla screech was made with like pine resin and stuff like that. You can go find that on your own. I thought that sound effect was fantastic. Like, obviously the most iconic thing to come from this movie. People have said it before, but fantastic. Like, if you're gonna use a sound effect from like the 50s as your ringtone, like that might be a good go-to. I just thought like great sound effect. I thought that all in all the sound effects were really good. Like the explosions, great. And so yeah, going into the special effects with the explosions and stuff. Okay, special effects, kind of weird. So the costume, let's talk about Godzilla. I don't like it as much as the stop motion. And now I think that there's something to be said with the freedom that using a costume gives you. Like with the stop motion, you have to kind of be more creative about the ways the stop motion monsters interact with your world. You have to be more creative about that, which I think King Kong does very well. And I think they did that in really creative ways. Here, I think that you had more freedom, but they weren't so creative about it. And that being said, I think you lose a lot of the charm of the movie without the stop motion, just in that I love that the stop motion is done at a different frame rate, I think 12 frames per second, whereas the movie is shot at 24 frames per second. And so I love the juxtaposition between the animation and the actual video. Like, it's not like, I don't know, it's an aesthetic thing. I love it. I think that I know it wasn't like intentional on the directors, although you've seen directors like Wes Anderson direct his stop motion animation movies at that frame rate. Because I think there is something charming about it. With this, you don't have that same like old school movie charm. And now, while that's not like something that the directors initially wanted at the time, I think there's something to be said about creating a product that is timeless, and with that, by losing the charm of it, it kind of wears off. They try to be too realistic, and that just doesn't hold up as well. And so I think you see this a lot with older movies, and older movies that tried to be really stylistic held up better than movies that tried to be realistic. And so the costume, while it was fine, not as good as stop motion. The special effects, I already talked about the toy scene, garbage. Just almost funny. And, like, kind of charming, I guess. But, like, bad. And I think a lot of that comes down to editing. But then the explosions and stuff, those are cool. They got the job done. Yeah. Moving on, what do I think that Radiation Japan and Godzilla represent? Pretty clear parallels between the American nuclear bomb situation in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I think that, and I've already touched upon this a little bit, but I think that they were definitely trying to make a political statement with Godzilla and his effects on Tokyo, but then also the effects of radiation creating Godzilla. And now that being said, looking at King Kong, everybody talks about how King Kong is a allegory for the slave trade in America, though the directors have gone out of their way to say that that's not true. And it's become such a joke at this point that even you have the great Inglourious Basterds scene.
Als ich aus dem Urwald nach Amerika kam, fuhr ich da mit dem Schiff?
Ja.
Geschah die Reise gegen meinen Willen?
Ja.
Auf der Schiffsreise lag ich da in Ketten.
Ja.
Als ich in Amerika ankam, wurde ich da in Ketten zur Schau gestellt.
Ja.
Bin ich die Geschichte des Negers in Amerika?
Nein.
Also dann muss ich King Kong sein.
I don't think this is a case of us overanalyzing the film as people might have done with King Kong, where King Kong has become an example of film students overanalyzing a movie, kind of like the drapes were blue, and maybe your language arts teacher says that the drapes represent the sadness of the character. No, the drapes are just blue. I don't think this is the case in this movie, just because the parallels are so strong, and even though they are in King Kong, I think they were really strong, and the fact that they had to remove the anti-American sentiments from the original Japanese version, I think is enough to justify that. Also, just want to bring up, this is the second movie we've watched with parallels to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I'm talking about Akira, greatest anime of all time, greatest movie of all time. Nope, not the greatest movie of all time, but Akira. Is there a cinematic universe there? Maybe. Just want to put that out there. Moving on. Brilliant or bust? So now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you my opinion as if I was somebody watching the movie back then, because I'm not somebody watching the movie back then. I don't know. I'm an 18-year-old born in the year 2000. Watching the movie now, I don't think this movie is good. I think it's a bust. And now that's not to say that I think that all movies from that time period are bad. I love King Kong. I love Psycho. I love a lot of these movies that we've gone back and watched. I've thought are fantastic. I even got in an argument with Tag because I thought that Psycho was a movie still relevant and a movie that still holds up today, because I think it does. I think that movie is an enjoyable movie. I think that movie was an enjoyable movie today. I don't think that I have to put myself in the mindset that it was an enjoyable movie back then. I think it is an enjoyable movie today. And I think that King Kong is an example of a movie that can be campy and be a monster movie and still be good today, because it knows what it is. It's not trying to be anything more than a monster movie. It just kind of... It does its thing. It doesn't try to be anything too much. It paces itself really well. Where this movie, I didn't talk about much bad pacing all over the place. King Kong knows what it is. It doesn't try to be anything more. This movie tried to be way too much, has way too much going on. It doesn't hold up as well as King Kong or Psycho do, or did, or whatever. This movie tried to do too much. It got the core principle of a monster movie wrong. You just need to establish the scale. Establish the threat of your monster. It got that wrong. That being said, I think the movie does have a good aesthetic. But if you're just trying to watch a monster movie for the good aesthetic, go watch King Kong. It's a good movie. Way more worth your time. That being said, also, go out, watch the new Godzilla trailer for Godzilla, also named King of Monsters. That trailer is fantastic, up there for one of the best trailers in recent memory. Starring Millie Bobby Brown, great stuff. Your time would be better spent there. So yeah, movie, bust, not a good movie. And with that, I'm Caleb Scythomal. If you enjoyed this video, this long movie review rant, please smash that like button. Subscribe for more DP film videos. Until next time, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for spending your time with me.